So sufficient assumption, meaning the correct answer choice will guarantee the argument 100%, leaving no ambiguity at all. Sometimes you can diagram these, as we'll see later, but in other cases, diagramming isn't necessarily useful because it may not fit some clear predefined formula. I think for this one, we actually have to engage with the argument. And the reason I say that we can tell the difference between formula and non-formula is based on the extent to which you have the ability to link together conditionals, again, which comes back to the same variable in multiple statements, or if we have a conditional in the evidence and a conditional in the conclusion, where there's repetition of variables. I don't see that going on here, really. I just see them setting up some preconditions, saying, just to paraphrase, if there's intelligent life, first off, sentient beings, intelligent life. Try to rephrase it for yourself to be as simple as possible. So intelligent life elsewhere, intelligent aliens, whatever. If they're elsewhere outside, we can't know unless they're as intelligent as us. Then they're saying going forward, as evidence, we can't send spacecraft out, and they'd have to be as intelligent as us in order to communicate with us. So either we're sending out spacecraft, or they're coming to us to communicate with us somehow. They're sending radio signals to us, maybe. Those are the only two ways we could ever determine the existence of these life forms. So they're failing to consider, or not bothering to explicitly state, alternate possibilities. Like maybe we could what? What's a way that we could also determine life elsewhere otherwise? Yeah, so, or what if we sent out satellite signals to them? It talks about them communicating with us and us sending out spacecraft. What if they send spacecraft to us, or we send out radio signals or TV signals to them? They're dismissing that possibility and saying that these ways are the only ways. So I think really just confirming that in some way would help to not strengthen, but to fully guarantee this argument. Sufficient assumption is like the ultimate strengthener because it guarantees 100%. And we want a choice that simply confirms what is already claimed in the argument. It really is, that's all that's really going on here.
That first sentence, when it says if there, and then a couple lines down says unless, how should we read that?
Yeah, sure, that's a great question. So translating unless.
But with an if, first sentence, at the start of it.
I see what you're saying.
That's why.
Yeah, so this is what.
Both of them do, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like a nested conditional. So it's like a conditional within a conditional. So you could have something like if X, then Y requires Z. Like that's something that could occur. That's something you could have. Is X, if X is true, then Y requires Z. It's pretty much what the stimulus is saying. So I'll just say if there's sentient beings, then we cannot determine this unless they're as intelligent as humans. So not determine unless as intelligent as us. But this unless is a tricky word. So we got to translate that on top of that. So we translate unless as the following. If we have no X unless Y. Anyone have thoughts on how to translate that?
No, I know.
No, I know. Yeah, that's the way to do it. So the unless becomes if not. So if not Y, then not X. Or we could say, more simply, not Y, then not X. Another way to do it would be to say the unless, I'll get rid of this for a second, unless introduces the arrow, then you negate the other part to make it into the sufficient condition. So there's two different ways to translate the word unless. They're both perfectly valid. I prefer this way because it ends up with a cleaner result that's positive more of the time than not. Whereas with this, you've got a negative requires a negative. You still have to do the contrapositive to make it in the positive form, which is typically easier to understand. So with this case, what was it? No, not determine this unless as intelligent as humans. How do you translate that? What does this become? So we could say if not intelligent, then not determine, or determine then intelligent. So then, back to that, if sentient beings then determine, if you can determine then they must be as intelligent.
Is the near future in this one pretty important as well? See that come up twice.
It's how they qualify their statement, because they're dismissing, they're not talking about the distant future, they're not talking about millions of years from now, but as far as how it relates to the argument itself, or the choices, I don't think it really comes in that much. And
yeah, you're right, it doesn't come.
Yeah. And also keep in mind that for this sufficient assumption, extreme language is fine as long as it gets the job done. So even if the correct answer doesn't say near future, that wouldn't be a big deal. It could be as broad as you want. It could say forever, period, no matter what, all the time. Then the correct answer? What is it doing? D. Yeah, so D is dismissing those alternatives and say the only way must be this. If you can't do one, then it must be the other. So again, it's that same concept we see again and again, the negative followed by a positive, kind of like the cake and fruit example I gave earlier. If it's not one, then it must be the other, meaning that everything is always going to be at least one of those two, which is a very extreme statement. And that's what this argument is doing. This argument is extreme in nature because it's saying if it's not one way to learn about them, then it must be the other way, failing to consider there could be a third way, a fourth way, a fifth way, we don't know. They're just dismissing those outright. And so D, as new information, if we take that as to be true, that will guarantee the claim in the stimulus that is only one of these two ways, that one of these two ways is necessary.